Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. There are more and more of you every time I come back here. I don't know where you're all coming from, but I'm so happy to have you here. And I've brought a gift in the form of another story I've never told before. Story 139. When I was growing up, we got our first computer in the house when I was right around 12. I was the only person in my house that used the internet. Not the computer. My mom was on there regularly enough. She mostly wrote emails and played Free Cell in Taipei. But the internet, well, that was entirely my domain. At first, it was just to dork around on the homepage of our local ISP. Thrilling as reading the back of a cereal box, but I really can't describe to you how new and novel and exciting computers were to me. I had a few friends who got home PCs at the same time, and that's where I got my first steps off of the homepage. See, back then, search engines and the indexing that supports them, that wasn't even in its infancy. Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves would return unreliable results at best. And moderation wasn't even a thought. The first and only time I searched for a cartoon I like, well, that returned Rule 34 of Babs Bunny. That level of detail in a paint.bmp image aside, I'm haunted by it to this day. It put me off the show completely. I can never watch it without thinking about that image and feeling embarrassed, wrong for what I carried in my head. But I digress. I started collecting links from people. Some were shock sites, because my social circle had a healthy amount of jerks in it. Sites that I wished I could unsee, but I still found myself checking on from time to time. Again, the internet, the act of accessing things while sitting in my home. It was fascinating. And once I exhausted the safe sites that I knew about, there was always this impulse to check in again on things that I shouldn't be looking at. I'd never been forbidden from looking at or told not to look at. I just knew looking at them was wrong. Kind of the same way I knew looking at Neopets or Purple Moon was okay. I knew my parents would have been pissed if they'd known I'd also seen Rotten.com. It was a different site, though, where I happened upon a web ring. That was the other way to find new sites to explore back then. And clicking through those links is how I found the site. I don't remember clearly what it was called. It had a deep blue background and a sidebar. I remember the sidebar because I'd been noodling around with the GeoCities website and was teaching myself the basics of those, so I appreciated a good side menu. And it had a page counter with thousands of views. My own only had about 10 or so, and I'm pretty sure 9.5 of those were me checking my font color. I was amazed to think about the thousands of people that had logged in, seen the same site that I was seeing. And on that page, beyond the scattering of crudely pixelated GIFs of fiery torches and rotating apples, there were some hyperlinked phrases. They were animal names: Golden Lab, Silver Rat, Blue Parrot, something like the Petting Zoo, and Red Bunny. For whatever reason, I clicked on Red Bunny. The page loaded. It was a black rectangle surrounded by little animated GIFs again, this time of Easter bunnies. The black rectangle was a video, an MPEG. I clicked play. It took a minute to buffer, but what I first saw was a man. The camera angle was cutting off his head,
but I could see his body. He wore a t-shirt, his arms were bare, so I could see that there was a cross tattooed on the right arm on the underside. The crosspiece was right below his wrist. His watch was on his left wrist, black and unremarkable. Also on the right, there was a ring, gold with a deep blue gem, what I recognized as a class ring. High schoolers got rings like that when they graduated. Then those hands disappeared beneath the table's surface, only reappearing to show what they now held, a rabbit. He kept one hand on the rabbit, holding it in place under its head, while he petted it with his free hand. The rabbit had these black marble eyes. Its nose twitched as it looked left and right. It looked nervous, but then all rabbits kind of do. And then his free hand disappeared under the desk again, coming out holding something different, something new, something small and shiny. A scalpel. I won't describe the rest. I can't do it, and you can't make me. But I'm sure any of you reading can connect those dots. I shut my eyes, completely forgetting I could stop the video in my shock and in my fright. Did you know rabbits scream? Well, I do. And I guess now you do too. That's about as much damage as I can bear to give you here. I was 12, and that scream is still in my head. It was the sound that made me open one eye and start clicking frantically to stop that video, close the browser. But even that took too long. The site had been pushing pop-ups the whole time, and every attempt to X out of one summoned two more like a Hydra's head made of porn actors. They wouldn't stop, and I finally mashed the big power button on the tower to banish them all with a plink and the sound of falling static. I stayed away from the computer the rest of the night. I guess when my mom went to turn it on, it came up with the blue screen of death. She had to take it in. She made me go with her. At that point, even as early as it was, my parents were already putting me in the role of computer specialist in the house. When the guy in the repair shop, the same guy who had sold it to us, there weren't explicit repair-only shops yet, and we were years away from Geek Squad. He said he'd have to wipe it. He asked us if there was anything on the computer that we wanted to save. I shook my head. He looked at me long enough to make me fear that he knew what I'd looked at. I had a brief moment of panic, thinking he was about to spill the beans, tell my mom exactly what had killed our computer. But then he shrugged and started pulling out some discs. I swallowed the panic like a lump in my throat. When the computer came back home, whatever childish curiosity I'd had about the bad sites was gone. Oh, I still got online, and I still browsed, but the bad sites were explicitly avoided from then on out. I never forgot, and that same dark, squeamish dread kept me on the path of Angel Fire fan sites for cartoons and anime, and only those explicitly not triggering any alarm bells for me. And for the most part, I stayed that way. I was so sure I'd be found out, but every day my parents didn't call me into the kitchen to yell at me, or the police didn't show up to arrest me for going on the bad sites. It just got a little easier to forget, to think maybe I was in the clear. I got older. I moved out, went to college, landed a job. My pastimes were a healthy balance, but I still indulged in some healthy doom scrolling the same way all of us do. I finally got to the point where I was dissatisfied with my current job and decided to start applying to others, including some states away from me. One job sent back an interview time. The employer was some startup that went under when the dot-com bubble burst, but they'd already very progressively determined that webcam interviews were the wave of the future, long before the panini. I made it through round 1 of interviews and was scheduled to meet for a one-on-one with a talent recruiter, aka a human filtration system. It was an older guy. He had the blushes of gin blossoms across his nose and cheeks. He ran through the questions perfunctorily, and I was answering them well enough. But something was off. There was just something about him. It was the feeling of having a word on the tip of your tongue. I felt like I recognized him. And when he reached below frame to grab a new pen out of his desk, that movement, I felt my insides shift, the whole world shift. He brought his hands out again, and my memory filled in his right hand, his ring hand, with not the pen he actually held. I saw nothing but a scalpel. My eyes flicked to his other hand. No watch. I looked back to his right hand again. In spite of the pen it held, a perfectly innocuous pen, my heart was hammering in my throat. The cuff of his sleeve had pulled back and exposed a deep blue crossbar poking out just under his wrist. The tattoo. The ring was different. The watch was different. The pen was ordinary too. But I just knew. In my head, I heard the rabbit again, ear-piercingly shrill. It took everything in me not to bolt. I gasped. I watched him look up from his paper briefly to the screen, and I turned my head, pretending to cough. But it was him. His body was still blocky, but wider, softer with age. His hands moved precisely the way they had in that god-awful movie. Beyond shadow of a doubt, I just knew. It was him. The man from the MPEG, so long ago. I bombed the rest of that interview. I couldn't keep my answers straight. I could barely keep my heart from exploding out of my chest. I don't think that he noticed or cared. Like I said, he was there to filter out undesirables before they made it to his company. The liver of the body, filtering toxins. The absolute irony of that statement is not lost on me. After I got back the perfunctory thanks but no thanks email from that disaster of an interview, I took a break from trying to find other jobs for a while. Where I wasn't ideal, but it was known, and it was safe. And sometimes, that's more valuable than anything else.
There's a certain age of kids that grew up with unmonitored web access to Web 1.0. We should really start a support group. At that age, you're just so curious to grow up, to see what's out in the world beyond your small hometown. And that curiosity drives you all over the place. Sometimes to hobbies and interests that will last you the rest of your life, your true calling, your north. And sometimes it results in a folder of things that you wish you could unsee. We should meet on Wednesdays. I'll bring the donuts. If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.